You didn't arrive here by accident. There's a deeper current beneath the surface of your daily life that quietly guided you to this exact moment. And as you listen closely, you'll start to realize that this isn't just a coincidence. It's a calling. There are narratives woven into your existence that didn't originate from your own story, yet somehow they've found a home within you. Wounds that were never yours to carry still weigh on your spirit. These inherited emotions and silent allegiances are tied to ancestral pain, repeating cycles of behavior passed down like family heirlooms, echoing through time in ways few dare to acknowledge, without fully understanding why. Something begins to stir inside you. A subtle but undeniable impulse to shift the pattern. Not because you want to turn your back on where you come from, but because a deeper part of you longs to honor your lineage by healing it. Renowned thinker Carl Jung once explained that until we bring the unconscious into the light of awareness, it will rule our lives without our consent, and we'll simply call it fate. And some destinies, the ones shaped by generational burdens, are too heavy to carry without losing yourself in the process. This awakening doesn't stem from superior strength, it's born from heightened awareness. It's not the absence of pain that drives you, it's the presence of a soul that has chosen to awaken. Much of what burdens your heart doesn't truly belong to you. The ache that you feel might not have originated in your lifetime, but it reaches you because you've been chosen as the one who brings the cycle to a close. One of the first signs of this transformation is an unshakable discomfort with what your family has always regarded as acceptable. This discomfort isn't about rejection, it's about clarity. It's as if your inner vision has sharpened, allowing you to perceive the emotional silence, the unspoken sacrifices, the guilt passed down like tradition, the kind of love that wounds in secret. While others may accept it without question, your intuition whispers, something about this isn't right. And even when you can't explain it logically, a quiet voice within insists that things cannot remain the same. You begin to understand that this discomfort doesn't come from judging your family or past. It comes from a deeply rooted sensitivity that no longer allows you to ignore what has always been suppressed. You may have tried to blend in, to silence yourself, to mimic familiar behaviors and repeat inherited phrases for the sake of keeping peace. But each time you deny your inner truth to remain loyal to the family dynamic, a part of you fractures, just a little more. It's as if a piece of your being has always known that continuing these patterns only delays the healing that's long overdue, not just for you, but for your entire lineage. Because the transformation you spark doesn't end with you. It ripples backward, touching the pain of those who came before and forward, creating space for future generations to live differently. Jung spoke not only of the collective unconscious, but also of the familial unconscious, that unseen energetic field where ancestral fears, traumas, and untold stories are stored, vibrating within your bloodline like a hidden frequency. And now that you're tuning into this frequency, don't mistake it for overreacting. You're waking up. Those called to end generational cycles do not act from blame, but from bravery. When you find yourself unable to tolerate what once seemed normal in your family system, you're not being difficult. You're initiating sacred change. You're beginning to hear a voice that doesn't come from external noise or societal pressure. It rises from the soul, a soul that no longer agrees to repeat what's broken. You start to realize this unrest isn't temporary or shallow. It's a profound signal, a pulse that intensifies during subtle, seemingly insignificant moments, a resigned phrase uttered during dinner, a scene that's replayed across multiple generations, an emotion that clings like a family name, inherited as if it were an identity. And you, without fully understanding why, find yourself unable to remain indifferent. It's not about placing yourself above anyone else. In fact, you've often felt out of sync, like you never quite fit into the emotional codes and expectations that shaped your family. You've tried to do what was expected, to play by the unspoken rules of your upbringing. Yet each time you pretend that none of it affects you, something vital inside dims. That's because you weren't born to conform to inherited pain. You came here to shift its very foundation. This calling may come with moments of ache and isolation, but it also reveals that your soul accepted a mission far greater than simply surviving. You didn't come to fix anyone else's life. You came to be the seed of transformation, not to tear down the family tree, but to prune it with intention so that something more whole and vibrant can bloom from its roots. Carl Jung once said that while those who look outward may dream, it is only through looking inward that we truly awaken, and through that honest inward gaze, especially at your most intimate connections, you begin to awaken to a reality others were never ready to face. You see clearly now. What you were told was love may have been rooted in fear. What was passed off as strength often disguised emotional coldness. The notion of sacrifice was sometimes nothing more than self-abandonment handed down through generations, like a sacred obligation. But you can no longer keep living according to a script that doesn't resonate with your truth. This isn't rebellion, it's consciousness. And true awareness doesn't shout, it smolders. It burns quietly inside you until the moment you decide to act from that fire, even when it scorches. Because the sting of truth is more honest than the numbness of repetition. You're beginning to carve a new story, even if you haven't yet found the words to define it. Another sign of this deep soul work is that you feel deeply moved by stories that don't belong to your own lifetime. Someone might mention an old loss, a missing presence, a forgotten sacrifice, and a surge of unexplained emotion rises within you. It's as if your soul instantly recognizes a pain you never lived through, yet are somehow carrying. Jung understood well that the boundaries of the psyche are far more fluid than we assume. When you respond to unspoken grief, you're not imagining things. You're attuned to the ancestral vibrations that are still seeking resolution, and you realize that these emotions aren't irrational or exaggerated. They're living memory. They manifest in your body, in your dreams, in the silence between your thoughts. Sometimes you feel a sorrow that has no clear source, like you're mourning something that never happened to you, but did happen to someone whose blood now flows in your veins. That unexpressed grief, passed quietly from one generation to the next, is now reaching for release through you. This is not by chance. You are receiving an energetic inheritance, something far beyond genetics or family traditions. You've inherited more than appearances or customs. You've inherited silence, unresolved mourning, emotional exile. And your soul, more aware and more open than ever, is creating the space for all of it to be expressed, so it can finally be transformed. There are moments when a simple phrase or a memory from your family history strikes you like a sharp pain in your chest. What you're feeling isn't nostalgia. It's a deep recognition. Your body becomes a bridge between what was once suppressed and what now has the chance to be liberated. And even if those around you don't understand why you feel so much, you do. You're not only feeling on your own behalf, you're feeling for all those who were never given the chance. Jung described the soul as a field where all rejected, parts, personal and collective, eventually seek a voice. And you are that voice within your family system. You are the one who can no longer look away from the places everyone else was taught to ignore. This is why you often feel overwhelmed, not because something is wrong with you, but because you are absorbing what has been held in for far too long. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a channel through which unspoken truths finally begin to flow. And though it hurts, there's a quiet knowing within you that this pain is the beginning of something honest, something long overdue. With your presence and awareness, you're cleansing what was never acknowledged in words. You're also beginning to realize that this connection to what you haven't lived isn't merely emotional, it's vibrational. You walk into certain spaces, hear old family tales, or even glance at a faded photograph and something within you stirs. A silent ripple echoes through your soul, a gentle, wordless tremor that tells you something unresolved still lingers there. And somehow, without fully understanding all the layers, you find yourself ready to carry an invisible legacy. You're not doing it for recognition, and it's not out of martyrdom. You do it because numbness is not an option. There's a part of you that simply can't ignore when something in your environment feels misaligned, when something deep within vibrates, out of tune. You've felt the weight of emotions that seem far heavier than your own life story could explain. And yet, you know it's not something you can just release and walk away from. because on some intuitive level, you know this burden didn't land on you by accident. It's here because you were the one strong and conscious enough to hold it, not to carry it forever, but to dissolve it. And that doesn't make you a savior. It makes you a vessel. A vessel through which long-frozen energy can begin to flow again. A living channel that allows ancient emotional knots to untangle. A soul courageous enough to reopen a door that was once sealed shut by trauma, shame, or fear. Even though the work is quiet and often lonely, it carries a sacred essence that transcends explanation. Carl Jung once taught that the unconscious wounds of a family system will always seek expression through one of its members, not to punish them, but to restore balance, to reorder chaos through awareness. And in your case, that member is you. With your heightened sensitivity, with your discomfort that often goes misunderstood, with your refusal to stay silent, you are the one who sees what no one dared to look at, the one who feels what everyone else learned to suppress. Each time you allow an ancient emotion to rise without resistance, each time you honor a sorrow that wasn't yours without being consumed by it, each time you break a pattern without guilt, healing happens. And it doesn't just ripple through your own life. It reaches backward into your ancestry and forward into those who have yet to be born. Even if it's invisible on the outside, that shift changes everything at a deeper level. Another sign you've probably noticed is the persistent feeling of being the odd one out in your family. The one who questions the rules everyone else follows without a second thought. The one whose mere presence disrupts the familiar comfort zone, even if unintentionally. You've always felt like you didn't fully belong, not because you were disconnected, but because you were attuned to a different frequency, one that the family system wasn't yet ready to hold. Jung understood that those who bring light to the ancestral tree are often rejected by its roots, and yet in staying true to yourself, even without their validation, you are honoring something much more profound than approval. You are honoring your soul's truth, and that sensation of not belonging. It didn't just appear in adulthood. You've felt it since childhood. You always sensed the world differently. You responded to emotions more intensely, noticed nuances others overlooked, reacted in ways that made people label you as too much, too sensitive, or too complicated. And for a long time you believed them. You tried to adjust, to reshape yourself to fit into the mold. But every time you did, something sacred inside of you began to dim. Because that difference wasn't a flaw, it was your compass. A silent reminder that you weren't here to replicate what has always been done, but to rewrite the story at its very roots. And rewriting doesn't mean controlling others, it means existing fully without abandoning who you truly are. It means standing firmly in your perspective, even when it unsettles others, even when it creates distance. Even when people respond to your authenticity with confusion or mistrust, what you represent isn't just a different opinion, it's an entirely new frequency, one that unconsciously challenges generations of denial and avoidance. Jung called the journey of becoming yourself the process of individuation, a path that requires breaking free from inherited expectations and finding your authentic self. And you are walking that very path. You're doing it by refusing to blindly follow the road you were told was the only way. You do it every time you stop where others rush forward, when you speak what everyone else avoids, when you choose based on inner alignment rather than social obligation. That lifelong feeling of not fitting in has now become a map. It points you toward your role, not as a savior, not as a rebel, but as a reminder that there is another way to live, to feel, and to connect. Yes, that role can be painful. Yes, it can be isolating, but you no longer see that isolation as punishment. You recognize it now as part of your soul's assignment, because someone had to say, "This ends with me." Someone had to interrupt the cycle, to challenge the old narrative, and that someone is you. You've probably also realized that the more authentic you become, the more clearly you see the contrast between you and your environment. Sometimes your mere presence seems to disrupt the flow of conversations, as if your energy quietly invites others to reflect on truths they weren't ready to face. It's not that you're trying to change them. You're simply existing in a frequency that refuses to mask itself anymore. And that, in itself, can make people uncomfortable. It often shows up as subtle rejection, unexplained distance, awkward silences. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your light is touching parts of others that have long remained in shadow. And light, especially at first, is often more unsettling than it is freeing. But you've made your choice. You will no longer dim your flame to make others feel safe. You know all too well the cost of pretending, of silencing yourself, of shrinking to fit. And now you've made a sacred vow. Your soul will no longer pay the price of belonging at the expense of your truth. You came to understand this truth, not through theory, but through emptiness, through inner fractures, through silent nights where everything on the outside seemed fine, yet inside, something in you was crying out. Jung once said that healing begins the moment a person dares to carry their own destiny, rather than continue living out the destiny of the collective. That is exactly what you are stepping into. You've stopped living just to keep the peace. Now you're learning to live in a way that honors your own soul. And that inner loyalty isn't just setting you free, it's creating space for freedom to echo forward into those who haven't yet arrived. What used to ache, that constant feeling of not fitting in, no longer stings the same way. Now it feels like confirmation, a quiet, powerful sign that your path was never meant to be repetition, it was always meant to be creation. Your energy isn't here to conform to a mold, it's here to melt that mold with compassion. You're not here to destroy what came before. You're here to transmute it. Not with noise, but with the steady clarity of someone who can no longer pretend to be anything other than who they are. Another sign is this deep awareness. Your choices aren't isolated. They don't just affect your own timeline. You've begun to feel in your bones that every decision you make sends ripples through your ancestry and your descendants alike. You no longer choose from ego or impulse. You choose from consciousness. Because you understand now, every time you break a cycle, you're not being selfish. You're liberating an entire thread of history. Jung recognized that individual. Healing is never just personal. It's collective healing wearing a human face. And by acting in alignment with your truth, you're becoming a new chapter in your family's story. One written in your own handwriting, not inherited from someone else's unfinished sentence. And with that realization comes weight, but also honor. You're not making these choices just for comfort or ease. You're moving with the full awareness that each step dissolves knots tied long ago, that every boundary you place with love is a new line drawn where none existed before, that each time you choose silence over reaction, truth over performance, soul over persona, you are carving out sacred space where there used to be only survival. And yes, even when it's difficult, you still do it. Even when no one acknowledges your effort, you keep going because this isn't about applause, it's about purpose. There's something within you, ancient beyond this lifetime, that knows you were born to close this loop. Not from bitterness, not from blame, but from elevation. You didn't come to punish your ancestors. You came to release what they couldn't. Jung believed that one of the most powerful ways to heal the past is to live fully and authentically in the present. And you are starting to embody that truth in ways both visible and subtle. What drives you now is no longer fear of breaking tradition. It's the potential of what could be created if tradition were transformed through awareness. You're beginning to sense that each interaction, each conscious conversation, each choice that aligns with your soul isn't just part of your personal growth. It's rewriting a collective memory through you. Change doesn't always arrive in grand declarations. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet courage of a firm no, in a gaze that no longer looks away, in a presence that no longer wears a mask. And in those small, quiet gestures, you are making history. Not because you're flawless, but because you are fully here. Not because you have all the answers, but because you've stopped running. And by not running anymore, you're now holding space where there once was only fear, silence, or repetition. And that space, now inhabited by your awareness, begins to shift everything. You've started to notice that each time you choose differently, something rearranges inside you, and also within your family field. It's not just an inner sensation. It feels like something ancient realigns itself, like when you say, "This ends with me," you're giving voice to someone generations ago who never had the power to say it themselves. Even if it goes unspoken, even if no one names it aloud, you feel it. Something moves across the entire system when you move with intention. You've begun to see that your journey, no matter how individual it appears, is intricately woven into a larger web. Your healing doesn't stop with you. It extends outward, touching everything connected to you. Each time you choose to walk away from manipulation, each time you step out of an inherited role, each time you choose peace over automatic conflict, you are honoring those who never had the strength, the choice, or the freedom to do the same. Jung affirmed that whatever is not resolved emotionally in one generation is passed on as fate to the next, and as you begin to resolve what was ignored for generations, you're not severing the chain with force, you're dissolving it, with presence, with awareness, because what goes unhealed is destined to repeat, and your soul can no longer tolerate another cycle that betrays its essence. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You don't seek permission, validation, or agreement. Your alignment speaks louder than any justification. And even if your path is misunderstood, you walk it in peace, knowing the peace you are building today is the inheritance your children or the children of your life will receive tomorrow. Each time you choose from the wisdom of your soul, rather than from the pain of your wounds, you become a link of light in your ancestral chain, turning generational suffering into a new beginning. And that beginning doesn't arrive from outside forces. It begins within you. Another sign, you feel a deep, almost primal urge to cleanse, not just your physical space, but also your relationships, your thoughts, and your emotional world. It's not an escape, it's clarity. Something within you is yearning for lightness, not because you're running away from discomfort, but because you're becoming clear about what no longer belongs to you. You're reaching a place where you can no longer carry what was never yours to hold. You can no longer maintain dynamics that distort your truth. Jung taught that what remains buried in the unconscious eventually manifests in the outer world. And you're beginning to release to make space, not to improve your life in some superficial way, but to welcome what your soul is now ready to receive. You're not just decluttering your home or rearranging routines. You're cleansing ancestral weight. You're making spiritual space. You start to notice that certain people, habits, and beliefs no longer align with your current vibration. Not because they're wrong, but because they no longer reflect who you are becoming. You're not escaping. You're choosing from a place of grounded self-knowledge, from a place more still, more faithful, more attuned to your essence. As you reorganize your outer world, you're also quietly reevaluating your inner loyalties, the silent agreements you've kept out of habit. You begin asking difficult questions. Am I carrying guilt that isn't mine? Am I holding on to relationships that only survive through fear of conflict? Am I still obeying ideas that no longer resonate with my deepest truth? And the honest answer is often yes. Much of what has weighed you down was never really yours to carry. Jung said that awakening comes when we look inward, and you've started doing just that. You're seeing your life now through the lens of calm self-inquiry, not harsh self-judgment. And through that lens it becomes clear. The tension, the chaos, the unease often come not from what you're currently living, but from what you've been dragging behind you. And you're no longer willing or able to drag that weight any longer. So you begin to release, sometimes gently, sometimes painfully, but always truthfully. You let go of inherited patterns that disconnect you, habits that cloud your awareness, roles that confine your potential. Because you know now, you cannot fully embody your purpose while entangled in invisible contracts with a past that has already completed its cycle. Every time you cleanse something, whether a habit, a belief, or an emotion, with awareness and without drama, you're performing a quiet act of love. Love for yourself, love for those yet to come, and love for those who came before you and weren't given the chance to do what you're doing now. You're clearing space, not just to start fresh, but to remember who you really are. And that remembrance is the closing of a chapter that's long awaited its end. You're also noticing something profound. Whenever you clear out the external, something within you feels lighter. This is no coincidence. Your environment starts to mirror your inner vibration. You no longer tolerate constant noise, shallow conversations, or the old excuses you once used to avoid confronting the truth. What was once easy to ignore now stands out in stark relief. And this cleansing process doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to explain away your pain. Other times, it's saying no without guilt, or allowing yourself to rest without feeling the need to prove your worth through productivity. You are dismantling piece by piece the invisible rules you inherited, the need to earn love through exhaustion, the habit of silencing your voice to avoid conflict, the belief that your worth is tied to your usefulness. And in doing so, you're beginning to write a new way of being in this world, one not based on survival or self-erasure, but on presence, truth, and freedom. Carl Jung spoke of integrating the unconscious not to reject it, but to free it. And now, as you turn with compassion toward the very parts of yourself you once tried to avoid, you are beginning that integration, not because everything is suddenly resolved, but because you've stopped fragmenting yourself just to hold it all together. You no longer need to be right. You're not trying to prove anything. What you crave now is peace. Peace with what you've chosen to release. Every object you let go of, every relationship you reshape, every emotion you allow to rise without demanding a full explanation. Each of these acts becomes a form of ancestral liberation. Because cycles don't end when everything is perfectly understood. They end when you decide that you no longer want to keep living from the wound. They close the moment you give yourself permission to choose from your soul, rather than from your inheritance. And you, even if you sometimes forget, have already begun making those choices. You are moving differently now. Another sign. You've started honoring your sensitivity not as a burden, but as a sacred gift. That ability to feel deeply, to sense what others overlook, to be moved by what appears small to the outside world. It used to make you feel exposed, vulnerable, too much. But now you see it as a kind of superpower, a holy bridge between what has collapsed and what longs to be released. Jung believed that what lies deepest in the human being is not what they think, but what they feel without knowing how to explain it. And in allowing yourself to feel, truly, deeply feel, you are opening a doorway to collective healing, one that begins inside your own heart. You now understand that your sensitivity isn't a flaw. It's your compass. It allows you to perceive fractures others can't see. You detect unspoken tension before it's acknowledged. You feel energy shifts in a room before words even enter the space. And though for years that gift felt more like a curse, something that isolated you from others, now you're beginning to realize that it's precisely what connects you to life in the most authentic way. What once felt like too much has become your clearest channel of awareness, because you're no longer trying to dull yourself to fit in. You've stopped silencing your emotions just to make others comfortable. You've chosen to remain present, even when that presence is painful, because you now recognize that presence is healing, not just for you, but for everyone around you. Jung said the soul isn't healed by strategies, it is healed by truth. And your sensitivity, when embraced instead of hidden, becomes a living truth. It becomes your inner compass, helping you make choices that align with your core. It shields you from what is no longer compatible with your frequency, and draws you toward paths not shaped by logic, but by a heart that's awake. Even when the road ahead takes you in directions others can't understand, you've stopped seeking approval. You're not trying to adapt anymore. You're here to express. You don't want to hide how you feel. You want to live in it fully. And that decision alone changes everything. You no longer see emotional intensity as a flaw. You recognize it now as a fire, one that burns through illusion, that reveals the truth hiding behind your discomfort. It's the language your soul uses to whisper what must be healed, released, or transcended. And the more you allow yourself to feel, the more honest the path becomes. Not because it stops hurting, but because it stops deceiving you. Yes, you are sensitive, and that means you are also a guide, a conduit, a point of transformation, because the ability to feel deeply is directly linked to the ability to free deeply. You've also discovered that your sensitivity doesn't make you weak, it makes you permeable. It lets you move through life with a depth others often avoid. You can't pretend something doesn't affect you. You can't ignore the weight in the room or the hidden message behind someone's smile. Your body registers it. Your energy absorbs it. Your soul interprets it. And though this has often been exhausting, you now see it for what it is. Not a weakness, but perception. You're developing an inner language, one that doesn't rely on proof or explanation. You know when something resonates with you, and when it doesn't. You can tell when someone says, "I'm fine," but every part of their presence tells a different story. You know that feeling. When everything around you seems calm, yet something inside quietly contracts. You've learned to pay attention to that subtle contraction. Jung spoke of the unconscious not only as a space of shadow, but as a reservoir of untapped potential. And your sensitivity is precisely that, a doorway to the unrealized, the yet-to-be born. When you allow yourself to feel without judgment, when you stop suppressing your emotions or doubting your intuition, you become a clear channel, a conduit for a new frequency, one that does not echo inherited pain, one that does not stay silent out of fear, one that does not numb itself for the sake of comfort. And that frequency, you are activating it now, with every sincere gesture, with every no your body speaks before your mouth does, with every emotion you allow to be felt, unapologetically. You are modeling a new way of being, one in which feeling is not a weakness, but a strength vibrating from the core of truth. One in which tears are not hidden, because they are sacred waters that cleanse memories generations before you couldn't process. When you fully embrace your sensitivity, it transforms into vision. It becomes an inner guide, a quiet flame that illuminates the emotional darkness still lingering in the world around you. That too is part of your role, to witness, to channel, to be that subtle fire that transforms what noise cannot reach. Another sign. Despite the pain you've experienced, a part of you still chooses to stay open. You haven't shut down, though you had every reason to. You haven't hardened your heart, even though the wounds have been real. And that, more than anything, proves that you are here to end a cycle, because you chose not to repeat the emotional closure that you inherited. You chose to remain soft, present, alive. Jung taught that true change begins when we stop acting from the wound and start living from awareness. And you, even in your exhaustion, keep choosing to heal. You recognize now that staying open hasn't been the easy choice, it's been the brave one. Closing off would have been simpler, understandable even. After so many disappointments, after giving so much without return, after watching connections fall apart, it would have made sense to build a wall. But you didn't. You chose to keep feeling, to keep trusting, to keep healing. And while that may make the journey more painful at times, it also sets you free. Because your soul didn't come to repeat the script of those who hardened themselves just to survive. You came to rewrite the story, from a place of conscious openness, from vulnerability turned into strength, from a wound reshaped into a bridge. Yes, you came to close a cycle, but not through emotional shutdown, through sacred closure. Jung said what isn't transformed is repeated, and you've chosen transformation, not through grand declarations, but through quiet acts of courage, choosing different words in the middle of conflict, holding on to self-love even when no one affirms it, creating distance without bitterness, looking back without resentment. And all of that, and even if no one sees it, even if no one names it, is active healing. It's evolution made visible through you. Every time you choose to stay open, even in fear, you break the pattern. You offer release for all those who close themselves off just to make it through. Without saying a word, you're showing your lineage that there is another way. That love doesn't have to be painful. That connection doesn't have to be born of scarcity. That it is possible to live without reenacting what once destroyed. And that possibility, it lives inside of you now. Because you chose the harder path. Yes, but also the brighter one. The path of the soul that trembles but does not close. The heart that beats with presence, even with scars. You've also begun to realize that your openness is no longer naivety. It's mastery. Because now you open not to be accepted, but because you understand. Closing your heart doesn't protect you. It only distances you from your truth. You've crossed the threshold where sensitivity is no longer a burden. It has become your path, a path you walk with intention, knowing that your willingness to remain available, to life, to love, to meaning, is a healing act in itself. When you choose to keep your heart open, something in the world gently begins to repair. Your ability to continue loving, even when you're misunderstood, even when you're judged, even when you've been hurt. That is ancestral strength. It is the part of your lineage that came here not to repeat the pattern of constant defense, emotional hardness, or silence as a shield, but to bring that pattern to a close, and that is a revolution. A quiet, potent revolution that doesn't require noise, only presence. Carl Jung understood that true transformation doesn't happen when we avoid pain. It happens when we walk through it without losing ourselves. And that's exactly what you've done. You've allowed yourself to feel without giving up. You've cried without extinguishing your light. You've stood alone without disconnecting from who you truly are. That inner place, quiet, unseen but alive, is where the cycle found its closing point. Not because it ran out of energy, but because you chose a different path. And that choice is what changes everything. Because when even one person in a family system chooses to stay open, to remain real, to show up from the soul, the entire story begins to shift. What once seemed unbreakable begins to unravel. What was once considered destiny becomes a choice. Through each act of conscious presence, through each boundary set without anger, through every moment lived in alignment, you are writing a different ending. And that ending, even if no one else witnesses it, is sacred, because it doesn't close from fear. It closes from love. Ending ancestral cycles doesn't mean rejecting your roots. It means returning them to the freedom they were never allowed. It means looking back without mimicking, moving forward without dragging, and inhabiting the present with a kind of awareness that isn't inherited. It's earned. And you are earning it. Jung taught that the soul awakens when a person dares to live differently, not out of rebellion, but out of truth. And that truth is now alive within you. Because even if it wasn't a choice your mind fully understood, your soul whispered, "It stops here." And that choice doesn't sever your lineage. It honors it. Because you're not closing the door to destroy, you're closing it to liberate, to make space for something fairer, cleaner, more whole. If something deep within you stirred, as you listened, if you felt a resonance in your body, in your story, in wounds you've never fully spoken aloud, that's because you are the one. You are the point where the cycle begins to transform. And if you're ready to continue walking toward your truth, rooted in your origin but no longer repeating its pain, subscribe to Whispers of the Soul. This is not just a place for reflection. It's a place where the soul recognizes itself. Here, every word is in service to your awakening.